Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Deciding to Love. Thank you so much for being here, listening to the show. And just a couple of quick notes before I share today's amazing conversation with Joe and Denise. First of all, if you haven't already subscribed on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, or all three, please do so. You can leave comments, and I would ask that you do. Please engage with the show on YouTube or Spotify. And lastly, if you don't mind leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, a positive review preferably, that would be great. These things are helpful for the brand, and I thank you in advance. Today's conversation is loaded with gems, wonderful perspective on how to develop a long-term relationship that doesn't just stand the test of time. Look, we've seen endless couples who've been in relationships for years who are miserable, not even trying to hide it, sadly. But Joe and Denise bring wonderful perspective on how to develop a long-term romantic relationship that is healthy and ultimately enjoyable. I also think that this is a great conversation, or more specifically, a great example of a conversation with a different perspective and even worldview. As I've mentioned in the last couple of episodes, I intend to have a wide variety of guests on the show, both couples and individuals, professionals, therapists, and the like, with differing perspectives and worldviews on life, politics, religion, and certainly relationships. And this is a wonderful example of that. So, as I've said in previous episodes, once again, keep an open mind and run with the things that you find value. And if you need to, leave the rest of it alone, that's okay. But keep an open mind, because there is so much value to be taken from this conversation today. Super excited about it. And I would venture that there may be some follow-up episodes, at least one or two anyway, with Joe and Denise in the future. They've got so much wonderful information and perspective to share. All right, without further ado, here's the conversation with Joe and Denise. All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Deciding to Love. I'm your host, Nathan Holritz, and it is a privilege for me to have on the show today, Joe and Denise. Thank you both. I was just saying this to you before we hit the record button, but thank you both again for being willing to do the show and have this conversation with me today.
You're welcome.
Our pleasure.
And I know we were also talking about this before we hit record, but I want to kind of speak to this for the sake of the general audience and those who might be interested in coming on the show. We were talking before we got started about how tough it can be sometimes to be super open about such an intimate topic as our romantic relationships, and especially going deep into those conversations. And so to that end, we had the opportunity, a couple of weeks ago or so, to chat just briefly about the show and the possibility of doing the show. And I was so taken by how open and transparent you all were right off the bat. And within the span of maybe 5 or 10 minutes, we were going deep in conversation. And that's exactly what I'm hoping for with our podcast, with the show, with the content that we're producing for couples out there. So thank you for that. Thank you in advance for the conversation that we're going to have today.
I mentioned, Nathan, that a lot of that has to do with not having judgments on ourselves. You know, like we're just in the process. We are where we are. We're not judging it that it's bad, wrong, or broken. There's kind of not the image attachment to it that I think a lot of people experience. But holy cow, I mean, the majority of the relationships that are in the world are very difficult and challenging. And yet so many people want to present, their best, put their best foot forward and put on their church clothes and make it appear as if it's all going well, which I think can also create a lot of harm, because it gives the impression that everybody else is doing well and we're the ones that aren't. Right? So that might be part of the
Well,
issue.
I love that you just jumped right into that. So let's just talk about that for a second. What do you think is the driving factor behind that tendency? Because, it's not a new concept. It's been discussed plenty in mainstream culture about this notion that you're talking about of presenting kind of the ideal self on social media or otherwise. What's the driving kind of psychology rather behind that behavior, do you think?
It appears that most of us are performing because we, for whatever reason, don't feel worthy of love. And if we present our best self, maybe we'll be able to hook a good mate. When I met Denise, I was going through a separation that led to divorce. Denise was going through a divorce, and I had very different plans than settling down with one woman as I was coming out of my divorce. And Denise invited me at the very beginning of our relationship to be completely authentic, Nathan. She said, "You don't need to perform in any way. I want to know who I'm choosing. Also, you're never going to be in trouble with me. I'm never going to say an unkind word to you. So if you burp and fart, burp and fart. Show up authentically so that I can make an informed choice." And brother, because I did not believe that Denise was going to be my forever person, I'm like, I have nothing at all to lose, and was really excited to engage in this sort of test. How long can this actually go? I believed that there was always some level, conscious or unconscious, of performing. And what I experienced with Denise was tremendous authenticity that produced an energy of peacefulness in my life. And I was captivated.
I love that idea of going into the relationship with the mindset of, here I am. This is me. I'm not trying to put on some facade. And on the flip side of that, the way I think, Joe, that you phrased that was some version of, what am I getting into? The person on the other side of you, what am I getting into with this person? It seems as though in many, if not most relationships, maybe even especially in the dating phase, we're trying to sort through, who is this person actually? Because most people do tend to put on some version of a facade. So I can imagine how freeing, and I'm certainly guilty of that. So I can imagine how freeing it had to have been to be able to have that experience.
Right. But the key is, if you believe you need someone else, you need that relationship in order to be happy or to feel loved or complete in some way. If that's where you're coming from, then that's more of a place of desperation, and you have to behave. You have to be on your best performance, because secretly you believe that you're not good enough. And so you perform to be good enough. This person will experience me as good enough or over the top or whatever, and then I'll be chosen. And so over and over and over again in our work, what we've discovered with people is the greatest fear is being alone. And they think that a relationship is what is going to prevent them from being alone. But Nathan, I was alone for many of my 33 years of marriage. So you can have a body next to you and still be alone. That body is never intended to fill that gap. So that's the work that we want to do before we get into relationships, or while we're in them. That can happen too.
I want to use this as a segue into one of the first big ideas that, Joe, I think you shared with me in advance of our conversation today. And I'll just read it verbatim. It just says, complete freedom for each other. What does that concept mean? Is it relevant to what we were just talking about, or maybe a whole separate concept? But what does that mean to you all, and how does that look practically in your relationship?
Yeah, well, it's my belief that love is not possessive. And so it allows the other to explore life in the way that they feel compelled to, or called to, or drawn to. So it's not my business to tell him not to go skateboarding because he's 58 years old. An electric skateboard that goes how fast?
40 miles an hour.
40 miles an hour. Out there with the asphalt and cars and cows where we live. And it would be overstepping my bounds, and it would be coming from a place of fear for me to try to control that with him, right? So he has a freedom to make that choice. And if fear comes up in me, I can take that fear inward and to God. That's where my unwindings and healings take place, is inward. And let the man go have fun. He needs to have fun. And then he also needs to learn what he needs to learn on a skateboard in traffic with cows going 40 miles an hour.
I love the with cows addendum there.
Yeah, because that's a reality out here.
It's serious out here.
So,
Yes.
please go ahead, Joe.
Well, this possession that Denise spoke about this idea that in marriage we are claiming our person and we need to protect them and or not let them get away from us or not be doing things that appear dangerous. Denise has an incredibly strong attachment to me personally. And for her to face her fear every time I grab my skateboard and go out for a ride, literally, she never tries to guilt or manipulate me into not going. And I know
Mm,
the great level of fear that is within her, but that never comes through in the experience that I'm having with her. I know it's present and I'm aware of it. And we also have this arrangement of freedom in our relationship. And so if she is triggered by me going out on my skateboard, it is what is required for her to pass through that fear so that we say the truth will set us free.
mm,
She's inwardly, if she's afraid, um, and she can see that that fear interferes with my desire to have fun on my skateboard, then she processes it and works it out without me even knowing it.
mm,
Brother, she never brings it up uh, in Joe, I need you to be different, or I'd like you to wear a helmet, or whatever it happens to be, whatever the fear is. She works on it and then can come back after the fact and say, this is what I discovered about myself. Thank you for going out to skateboard because I realized this lesson in the wrestling with God in the on the point of fear. It's not even a wrestling with God. It's just really an allowing for the truth to emerge, which
mm.
is that our safety and security in this life is not known necessarily by us, but we trust in a source, in love that is working all things together for our good. And when it appears fearful in our experience, that's an invitation to go inside to heal that fear.
Hmm. Oh, I love this. Okay. So
So
you said,
Is,
no, please go
is there
ahead, Denise.
was there another point that you were wanting to draw out around freedom?
Well, yeah, actually, I wanted to. So there's two things I want to touch on. One, Joe, you just said something that really caught my attention. And you may see me kind of look down to the right here. I'm going to taking some notes as we go along. But you said something about Denise working that fear out on her own. I want to come back to that in just a second. The first thing that I want to touch on, though, Denise, to your question, is I hear some version of that word let my partner in endless conversations as I observe, listen to other couples. And ultimately, it just makes me really sad to hear because it represents this idea of control. And as you all so wonderfully highlighted, that's rooted in fear. But can you just maybe expound on that? I guess that mindset that's easy certainly to go into that so many couples have, and maybe a step or two out of that, what might enable them to begin to work their way out of that mindset?
So the way that I'm using the word let is not he needs permission for me. It means I'm not doing anything to prevent him from having that experience.
Oh, yeah, and to be clear, I didn't think that you meant it about your relationship. It seems pretty clear that you guys are I mean, again, going back to that idea of freedom, you're creating a relationship, a dynamic within your relationship that encourages that freedom. What I meant, just to clarify, was I hear that word let used in other relationships that don't have that dynamic of freedom amongst each other. And I just think it's sad to observe that because here we are, 30, 40, 50, however year old adults, and yet we're still talking about our partner like they're our parent. And it just seems like a very weird dynamic and not one that helps create this really passionate, dynamic, romantic relationship. So I'd love for you just to speak a little bit to what maybe has enabled you. Joe alluded to it a little bit, but what's enabled you, Denise, for just as an example, to step beyond the innate fear associated with the maybe tendency to want to control, to learn to let go, because I think a lot of couples could take example from what you've done.
Yeah, I hear you. Um I just had this conversation with one of my closest friends around her asking her husband if she could go. That was the statement. And I
Right.
said, I I don't know what you're talking about. She goes, well, if you need to go somewhere and you need to ask Joe, is it okay if I done? I said, absolutely not. If I need to go somewhere, I say, I need to go. to this X, Y, and Z, and I'll be gone for this amount of time so he doesn't worry or anything. But I've never asked his permission. He's never had to ask my permission. We might check in with one another, like, I don't know what you have planned today, but this is on my agenda kind of thing. It's just consideration, but certainly never asking for permission. Consideration is a very different conversation and it feels different. Even if it conflicts with something that he wants to do or I want to do, figuring out how can we both have the experiences that we need to today, and how can we make that all fit? And it always does. There's never been a time where really, there's been a deep frustration because you get to do what you want to do and I don't get to do what I want to do. So that's that. Where I go with, I don't have fear come up very often. I did definitely in the beginning of our relationship. And but the reason that I don't have much fear now come up is because of what I did from the beginning of our relationship, which was to inquire about the fear. And the fear is almost always around attachment. In the Buddhist way, the Buddhist teaching is that peace ultimately is non-attachment. And so when we have this really strong attachment to somebody, like I have to have him or I'm not going to survive, you have to be mine, and this isn't going to go well here if you're not mine and I don't get to have you, is what we've done is we've put a human in the place of God. And so, of course, if God dies or if God disappears and walks out the door and God doesn't want you anymore, yes, you're going to collapse. You're not going to make it. But if we have the proper orientation toward that we're in a relationship with a human that does bring us joy and does provide beautiful things in our life, but is not the ultimate, like he isn't. It's like my reference is that God gave me Joe. God speaks through Joe to me. I'm in a relationship kind of secondhand through God, with God. And so if something happens to Joe, my God did not die. So having that as a context of relationships, and that can even be with your children. And that doesn't mean there won't be grief. That's not the point. There's a difference between grief and suffering. And so, yes, there would be grief, but it wouldn't be because my God died. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely, it
So
does.
that's how I've reorientated my experience with Joe, and also believing that this God, this source that I'm in a relationship with, absolutely knows what is for my highest good and what is in Joe's best interest. And so it's always working out that way, even if it's uncomfortable and I don't like it.
Yeah. You talked about the Buddhist philosophy earlier, and I don't remember the exact the verbatim quote, but and I wish I could exactly, but it plays on that very idea of not connection, but the attachment. You used the word attachment earlier. Attachment is the source of all suffering. Some version of that line. So what you're saying, I mean, it resonates with me. It makes a lot of sense. And again, I'm saying this. In fact, a lot of this show is just because I want to learn these things and get better at these things. I know that personally, when I've created or given too much significance to particularly another person in my life, it really has led to way more unnecessary suffering in my life.
Yes.
And I'm still working on learning to create the distinctions that I need to in that regard. But this feedback and the way that you're breaking this down is super helpful. Certainly for me, I'm sure it will be for our audience as well. So thank you for that. I want to go back though to something, Joe, that you talked about. You talked about Denise working on that fear on her own. And one of the things that you commented ahead of time leading up to our conversation today, and again, I'll just read this verbatim. You said, "We live, your partner is not your problem." And I'm assuming a little bit here, but it seems that's related to the earlier statement that you made, Joe. Can you all explain what that idea means in the context of your relationship?
Yes. This idea that your partner is not your problem, um, really strips away any energy of victim mentality that may be in my experience. So if I'm saying Denise is my problem because she rolls her eyes when I want to go out to skateboard,
Mhm.
I then become a victim to what it is that she's doing, rolling her eyes, shaking her head, whatever that happens to be. And how easily it is for me to give away my power to another to engage in some suffering of some kind, some dissatisfaction of some kind. So the statement, my partner is never my problem, is a tool to turn the lens back into myself, find out where I'm being triggered, find out if you can truly, if you take the time to investigate the story, Denise is, Denise causes me upset because she has this hesitation of me going out to skateboard, which I love and I have fun. To investigate that statement and really find out if it's true, because a lot of the ideas that we hold are really only in our own head, and we're making up stories that support our overarching story of who we believe ourselves to be. And so when Denise and I met, she talked to me about a love bucket, this bucket that we have inside of us that for so many of us has just so many holes in it. And what we do as humans is we look to try to fill that love bucket in many, many, many different ways. But it doesn't make any difference how much love is coming into our experience. If the bucket has holes, it's going to leak out. And then we're continually needing to look for some kind of validation that just slips away. So what Denise has taught me through this experience of unconditional acceptance, which is what we call love, unconditional acceptance. When I lose my mind about something, when I'm afraid and I'm much more vocal about my fear, I don't generally go in to process that as quickly as Denise does, and definitely not as quietly as she does. She holds space for me, an allowance of whatever it is that's disturbing my peace and whatever resistance I'm bringing into the experience that I'm experiencing suffering in. She allows for that. And in that allowance, then I have space. I'm not being belittled or emasculated. I have space then to explore, well, is this really true? And then be able to look at it through a couple of different filters. I'm going to have Denise explain this process of this healing as we go through these questions. But to answer your question, this idea that our partner is our problem, if they're never our problem, then the problem is a perception that we're holding that, when investigated and released, can set us free. You're on.
Yes. So I love that you said that when we understand that our partner is not our problem, it actually puts us in the position of power. So if I believe that you're my problem, or that Joe's my problem, or my mother is my problem, or my children are name it, whatever we want to apply the problem to. If I believe that, then that thing is outside of me. And then in order for me to get what I believe that I need, they have to change. And I don't really have the power to do that.
Wow.
So that makes me a victim, right?
Yeah.
But if I believe that nothing that happens outside of me is actually my problem, why I'm upset is something got triggered in me that is a story. It's a lie. It's a childhood belief that we got between the ages of birth and 6 or 7 years old. Those things were solidified in us. And we spent the rest of our life gathering evidence to be right about the story. And the story can sound like, I'm not good enough. For Joe, the story sounds like, I'm a small, weak disappointment. So if I were to say, Joe, you need to be really careful out there. Don't go above this, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to be triggering. I'm a small, weak disappointment. That's what he's going to hear. So that doesn't work. And that certainly wouldn't draw us closer together.
Yeah.
So in order
Joe is
to,
nodding vigorously.
yes, yes. And so I don't want to do anything that empowers that story. And he's never going to figure out how fast he should go or if he should wear a helmet or what he should do until he doesn't and then learns from that. That's how we learn,
Yeah.
Nathan. We don't learn because somebody else told us something.
Yeah.
We have a whole community, a religious community. I'll speak specifically about the Christian community because I was in it for so many years, that that is behaving because they want a fire insurance policy and they don't want God to be mad at them. And so they're
Mm.
behaving, but they really haven't figured out for themselves to own the truth of whatever the rule is, whatever the thou shalt not is. They haven't figured that out. And so what you find in a lot of these churches, a lot of these uh, pastors, when they think nobody's looking, they go touch things that they were
Mhm.
told that they shouldn't.
Yeah.
But that's because it never became a part of them that would harm them or that would harm their family or their church or whatever. They were just following the rules and behaving. And just like adolescents, they'll follow the rules at home so they don't get smacked or on restriction. But boy, give them an inch outside that house and they want to see what that thing is, right? So
Is that because it's a fear-based behavior ultimately?
uh the choice? No, it's a curiosity.
Well, no, I'm sorry. The rule following that you were describing, particularly in the dynamic of the church.
Yes. Yeah, you're afraid. You've been told that God will light you on fire or that you'll be disciplined severely in some way if you step outside of this box. And so they're terrified to do that until they can't not do that
Yeah.
because whatever is in them compels them to go try on that dress or put on those pair of shoes or whatever it is, or walk into that bar or strip club or like we're actually, I think, designed to be curious.
For sure.
So, but tell you what, you put your hand on that stove once and you likely won't do it again, not because somebody didn't told you shouldn't,
Hmm.
but because you know that it's harmful. So in relationships, we don't want to create any more harm and perpetuate the lie that is this false belief in our partners by accusing them of doing something bad or wrong. So I'll give you an example of that. We cannot cause harm in others. So just try that on. I cannot hurt your feelings. Your feelings can be hurt by something that I say or do, but I'm not hurting them. The wound that is already inside of you is doing that work. So that's why if you move through a relationship with the perspective that you're driving me nuts right now, but you are not my problem.
Hmm.
What you just did or said or didn't do or say was like a knife in my gut, but that you are not the problem. The problem is I have a wound in here that is being asked to be healed. And I can only heal it if I go look at it and see
Hmm.
what it is. And with all the people that I've worked with, it's always exactly the same thing, Nathan. It's a lie
Hmm.
all the time.
And in the safety of unconditional acceptance with your partner, we've created this environment. Grace has created this environment in which we can truly hear one another and not take these things personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, you've mentioned unconditional acceptance more than once now, so I want to get to that. I made note too, as you were talking, that you were defining love with that phrase, unconditional acceptance. Also want to come to that. Before I do though, the thing that, and this is obviously me projecting, you kind of alluded to this idea of projection earlier, Denise, and it's so true in so many levels. I do it all the time. But when I read that phrase earlier, let me pull it up here, your partner is not your problem. The thing that came to mind for me, at least because of my personal experiences, is maybe the significance of personal responsibility, individual personal responsibility within the relationship. Joe, when you talked about the fact that you're going to go out and ride the skateboard, Denise may have this fear about it, but you aren't having to kind of console her and help her work through that. She's dealing with that on her own. To me, that represents this idea of personal responsibility. And this may actually even tie into the conversation about unconditional acceptance, but what role does personal responsibility take in maybe your relationship to begin with, and maybe your perspective on that as it relates to romantic couples in general?
The example that you used with me going out skateboarding and Denise working this out for herself, working through her fear. We jokingly sometimes say, "You're welcome," because we can't work on the trigger if we're not aware of what's present there. And I think that's our personal responsibility. Our personal responsibility is to be our best healed um, version of ourself in relationship, because in that space, if I'm we can only take responsibility for ourselves. So this, I think, even now as I'm saying this, sounds more like an oxymoron. Personal responsibility, really, we can only take care of ourselves. But because we've been conditioned as children by our parents, and if we have children, the mentality is, well, if I know something, if I'm wiser, if I've learned these lessons, I'm going to impart them to you to experience. But we're all having a very different experience of life.
Sure.
And so, in personal responsibility, I would say it's my personal responsibility to work on myself and heal the triggers that are within me so that I can be the best, safest, most loving version of myself in Denise's presence, which then fosters great connection. If we are trying to manipulate or criticize or tell our partners what to do, that I don't, in your experience, does that bring you closer to your partner or does that separate you?
No,
In the
definitely creates separation.
and in that separation, we call these micro tears. They're happening continually, and they're happening to wake us up. They are happening to show us where we're stuck in a lie that is not true, but that we're projecting or blaming our partner for. And then there was an occasion when I had proposed to Denise, and then I had reneged the proposal, and then I told her, "Baby, my ego's just driving me crazy and I need to work this out. So if we could just not be engaged right now while I'm processing through this." And she's like, "Hold on, you'd like to remove the stimulus so that you can be more comfortable to work on this?" And I was like, at that time, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. I know how this sounds, and I just need to work out some of my crazy. And she said, "Okay, how do I know what's in my best interest, God? I adore Joe and I want to be his wife. But if there's some hesitation on his part, how do I know that's not God coordinating the details for my highest good? Maybe it's not Joe. Maybe it's somebody else. Maybe it's nobody." So in that, the space that was created for me allowed me, because of the fragileness of my self-perception, to sort of lick my wounds on my own and pass through this thing with the least amount of guilt and shame sticking to my experience. Denise was never projecting that back at me. So I got to go through cleanly in my own time, my healing process in that. And then as a result of that, I got to surprise her with our wedding day, which she didn't know about until the morning that we got married, on the day that we had planned while we were engaged before I reneged the proposal. The universe literally, Nathan, coordinated all of these details. So my resistance in continuing in our engagement forced Denise into a really dark night of her soul. There were three different experiences that sort of collapsed all at one time, her paradigm of safety, and allowed her to grow and allowed me to become this hero, putting on this wedding and surprising her with the thing that she wanted the most.
Wow. Beautiful. Denise, do you want to add anything to that idea of personal responsibility before we talk about this notion of unconditional acceptance?
Yes. So I think where it gets messy for most couples is they think that part of their responsibility is for their partner.
Hmm.
And therefore, they need to warn them when they're doing something dangerous or help them make a different decision. And women in particular are master manipulators. I don't know where that seed was planted in us, but it has something to do with our ovaries because almost all women have this ability to manipulate, and they often won't even know that they're doing it.
Hmm.
There were many, many times when I wanted a situation to turn out a certain way, and I knew that I could wield the sword of manipulation and it would happen. I'm really that power. I'm super powerful. Women are. And then even to make him think it was his idea. Uh, but I did not do that because I was afraid of myself. I was afraid that I would be pushing an agenda that wasn't in our best interest because I wanted it or I was afraid of the other outcome. So I would just surrender that. So the first thing I would want people, couples to understand is you are solely responsible for yourself. You are responsible for your own happiness. You are responsible for your own state of peace. You're also responsible for your own state of upset. So when you come from that position, first of all, the ego loves to blame. It wants it to be everybody else's fault because it wants to be the victim. But if you want to live an empowered life and have an empowered relationship, you have to take on this uncomfortable uh, level of responsibility. Like, nope, I'm only responsible for this. Oh, and by the way, that applies to our adult children.
Hmm.
And that's a hoop to jump through. Holy cow, because parents think that they're responsible for their children as long as they're their children.
Hmm.
But that isn't true. And also, when we're trying to impose control, because the opposite of being responsible is being controlling, on another, we are disempowering them. We're robbing them of their power to be the responsible person in their life for their things. Does that make sense?
It really does. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the parent of two 20-plus-year-olds, and so yeah, this very much resonates with me. And it's been interesting to consider the approach that I'm taking in the parenting role, even though they don't live at home anymore, even though technically they're adults. On paper, I'm using air quotes for people that can't see, but at the end of the day, I think you're absolutely right. You nailed it. That there's some significance to, and again, I'm still trying to figure this out. I'm working through this, but some significance to creating an environment where they are, at the very least, encouraged to learn to take that responsibility. Um, from your experience, would you say, like, what is the balance in that? I know this is not a parenting show, but I'm curious now that we're talking about it, the balance between enabling or encouraging or even challenging them to take responsibility, while also certainly being there to support, to encourage if they want the advice, to give some advice. What does that balance look like, at least from your experience?
Yeah. Well, you just nailed it, Nathan. It's if they ask.
Hmm.
They have to ask. You could see it clear as day. And if you try to impose that on them by giving helpful advice to them, they're never going to hear it. They can't hear it till they're ready to hear it. And that takes experience. And sometimes that takes falling down. Like if you're learning to ride a bike and you have training wheels and then they come off, your parent can't hold the back of that bike all the time. And they will usually fall a couple of times before they really figure out, oh, this is what balance feels like on a bike, right? So I think that one of the so I have all boys.
Hmm.
I got to raise men, and I had some amazing um, education in raising men. I had boys, and three of them, and then I also had a husband who was a male. So now I've got four men in the house, And I took a class called Understanding the Value of a Man for 9 years, twice a year, to
Wow.
really understand men and how that works. And I'm so grateful that I did, because my oldest son ended up going into the army.
Hmm.
And I was a kind of a mushy mom. And I would have wanted to mush him, like, my little boy, and take such good care of yourself, and Johnny, don't get hurt. And that would have absolutely been the wrong thing to do, because what a parent wants to communicate to their children is, you've got this.
Yeah.
You are smart enough, you are strong enough, you can figure it out. And so I did that with Jonathan. I did that with all the boys eventually, but I did that with Jonathan, and I got to see the distinction between coddling a, an adult man, which I see women do all the time. That's emasculating, and it makes a man not want to be that close to his mother, because he's already afraid that he doesn't have what it takes to make it as a man in the world. And then you've got a mother standing in front of you affirming that.
Hmm.
And you don't have what it takes. You need your mom.
Hmm.
So I was very grateful that that gift came along when it did. And also, rather than giving advice, ask questions. So even with your partner, instead of that just seems like a terrible idea. I think we should do it this way. You can ask questions. Why does that make sense to you? How do you see that working out? Do you see another way? Is there another possibility? So they're using their own critical thinking. And then when they come to the same decision that you probably have, ladies, then they own it. And it's not like she's telling me what to do.
Yeah. That totally makes sense. Oh, this is so good. Okay, thank you for sharing your insight on that. I want to come back to this idea of unconditional acceptance. And I'd love for you to correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm internally, I'm making the connection between personal responsibility and unconditional acceptance. Maybe I'm reading that phrase unconditional acceptance too literally. So maybe let's start first of all with just a relatively simple definition of what this idea of unconditional acceptance means to you when you say that phrase.
Well, let's give the tagline:
Okay.
unconditional acceptance without the need to change another. Because a lot of people can say, well, I unconditionally accept you the way that you are, but you've really got to change these things. You drink too much, you play too hard, like whatever it is, right? But I absolutely accept you. Well, that's not unconditional acceptance. Acceptance is without trying to change the other person into an image that you prefer. It would work better. Women are more engaged in this. One of the things that I learned is that men choose a woman and hope she'll never change, and a woman chooses a man for his potential to change.
Sure.
So he's got enough going for him. But when he comes into my education, my classroom, I'll reform him into the rest because he's got great potential. So love is unconditional acceptance without the need to change them.
Mm.
Now, what some people hear when we say that is, and we stay,
Mm.
and we stay in the relationship. And that's not the case. The case is we're still taking personal responsibility. So if this person is abusive, and we discover somewhere along started off fine, we grew, they didn't, and then we get to a place where we're like, oh, we're just not a good fit anymore. I love you. I can unconditionally accept you right where you are right now, doing all the things that you do. I accept that that is you and your life path, and it's not a good fit for me. And so it's time to bring this to a closure.
Hmm.
Do you hear the distinction?
I do. Yeah. And as you're talking about that, naturally my personal experiences are coming to mind in that where to go with this. So personal I like, first of all, I like the distinction that you made about just because I accept you, AKA I love you, doesn't mean I stay. And we've already talked about the idea of, just for the sake of simplicity, I'll say not parenting or trying to parent our partner. Within this framework, how should couples still work together to give each other feedback? Is there room for feedback? I'm just trying to, I guess the relationships that I've been on, any one of them, whether I would generally label them good or bad, there was good elements of it and bad elements of the relationship. And I don't know of any relationship, at least from my 46 years of experience, that I could potentially be in that's going to, quote unquote, be perfect, obviously. So we're going to run into these challenges where I don't mean kind of surface level flighty things that are just, quote, annoying to me, but significant issues that come up, like you just alluded to, Denise. How am I, in the context of that relationship, working to, I guess, continue in that relationship, to build a relationship, maintain some level of hope that the other person is going to learn so that we can stay together? Or is that just the wrong mindset altogether in this? I guess I'm flailing a little bit here because I don't know. Yeah, I don't know which direction to go. What are your thoughts?
Well, there are assumptions that we have in the West about relationships and specifically about marriage. We're saying, "Oh, we're going to take you as my partner for the rest of our lives," but I mean, the obvious reality is that that doesn't happen for most people. Most people are not married for their whole life. There is more divorce than there is marriage. People keeping together in a relationship. And also, the people who are still together in relationship doesn't necessarily mean that they're happy in that
Oh,
relationship.
for sure.
Perhaps they're just, coexisting in the relationship, but because of moral fears, they remain together, or for whatever other reasons, the children, their parents, their community, their status, will remain married. So I think the first thing to really look at is, if can we look at relationships as a classroom? And for this season of my life, I'm in this particular classroom with this person to learn lessons about myself and engaging with others. If we remove the idea that it has to be forever and just look at it as, well, this time, I'll give you an example personally. So I was married, my first wife, for 20 years. And towards the end of our marriage, I was in a space of knowing that there needed to be more in this life than I had currently been experiencing. And I had experienced a lot of the markers in the West that would say you should be happy because you've achieved this, and this. There was still this deep desire within me to know myself better. And in that, began letting go of my wedding photography business. And my ex-wife was incredibly fearful she said, "Joe, you wanted all these things. We have these expenses, but yet you don't seem to care about, making money anymore, keeping your business alive." She said, and from that place of fear that I'm not sure she was fully aware of, she said, "Honey, I would like you to quit drinking, quit smoking weed, and I want to go to marriage counseling."
Hmm.
And I was very clear that that wasn't my path. I wasn't ready to quit drinking. I wasn't ready to quit smoking weed. And I knew we had done a little bit of marriage counseling. But I knew that in the 20 years that had been with her, I was doing my best to create the kind of relationship that I certainly wanted and I thought was working for her. So I knew that I was already in this space of, I'm giving as much as I can to this relationship, and therapy, as far as I had had an experience with, didn't seem to be the answer for me. So I let that relationship go.
Can I pause you?
Yes.
Because he couldn't make her happy.
Hmm.
Because she was looking for her happiness in what Joe did.
Hmm.
And he couldn't make her happy. And one of a man's greatest need in a relationship is to make his partner happy. And if he fails at that, he would rather let her go so she could be happy with another, because ultimately that is his deepest desire, is for her to be happy. And he was failing at that.
So that is what we say. That is what we say, unconditional acceptance. I can still love you and not be with you. And I have a really beautiful experience with my ex-wife still. We have a great open relationship. We've had deep conversations over the last 12 years, 13 years that we've been separate. And my soul, what it was looking for, Nathan, what I thought maybe it was, I was going to have a lot of sexual experiences with other women that I'd always wanted to do. I'm like, that's going to make me happy, not quit drinking and smoking weed. Like, add in a whole bunch of other, a variety of sexual experiences
Yeah.
that I thought was going to lead me to some kind of happiness. And what I encountered with Denise was this incredible grounded peacefulness that captivated me. And so I thought in this experience of unconditional acceptance, and that I'm never going to be in trouble, and that Denise wasn't going to be my last relationship, I'm like, okay, I'm going to show up authentically. And in that authenticity, sometimes that looked messy. I was having conversations with Denise about my desires to be with other women 5 years into our traveling together and being with one another every day, and me adoring Denise and her adoring me. And still, in my mind, she would often ask me, like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, Joe, how happy are you in this relationship? And Nathan, I couldn't get to a 10. I couldn't intellectually allow myself to get to a 10, because then I'm like, well, then what happens after that? So I'd say, like, it's like a 9 or 9.5 or whatever. Like, I couldn't say it was a 10. This was fulfillment for me. And in that process, even, she held great space. Okay, well, this is the relationship. You appear to be incredibly happy, Joe, and you adore me every day. And that I could say yes to. I'm going to love you the best that I can love you today, but I don't necessarily know that I can still be here tomorrow. And that seemed like the safety that was required for me to continue to heal those holes that were in my love bucket, for those to be filled up, for those to be patched. And then once your heart is healed, and that's through this process of us telling ourselves the truth and shifting out of the old beliefs and the old stories that made us feel guilty, made us feel shameful. I never experienced that in my relationship with Denise. So for 5 years, I'm in this classroom of unconditional acceptance. And I'm like, wow, this freedom feels so good. I want to be around it. I want to tell you the truth. I want to be intimate because I'm never in trouble. So in my previous marriage, I was in trouble. And I could see how my choices to, like, go to Burning Man for a week with my friends and not invite my ex-wife, I could see how that could be troubling for her, because she also knew this desire that I had for other women. And so the classroom that I required with Ingrid had its course. It had served its purpose, and I love her, and I want her to be happy. And as Denise had said, all that I had done would not fulfill her fully either. So that relationship ended, as relationships do, and then it was an opportunity for a new experience. And I wasn't really sure what that experience was, but I can tell you, I was certainly had no idea that this level of truth and honesty and adoration was even a possibility.
When we talked a couple of weeks ago, one of the things you said about this idea that, Joe, you were interested in relationships of some kind with other women. And first of all, I have to give you props for just being open and honest with Denise about that at that stage in your relationship, because a lot of times guys won't talk about that. They kind of tuck it underneath the rug, and then naturally that creates that curiosity that maybe pushes them or encourages them to go explore dishonestly outside their relationship. But one of the things that you all talked to me about at that point was the fact that Denise's non-control in that situation, her responding to you with, all right, if that's what you want, go ahead. It naturally caused you to pause and to kind of reconsider. And suddenly this crazy drive to go have these other experiences dissipated, whether it was overnight or, over a span of time, it dissipated. And at least part of what drove that was the fact that she wasn't trying to control you. I think that's such a wonderful, a lot of people may not agree with one part of that story or another from, like, in their own personal lives, as far as the thought process or behavior, whatever it might be. I think the example of Denise, you not trying to control that situation, and how Joe just naturally responded to that, like, oh wait, she's not trying to control me. She's not telling me I can't do this, I can't do that. How that naturally just drew you back to her rather than pushing you away and having you go run off to these other relationships. I think it's just such a really wonderful example for just couples in relationships in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's shocking. It shocked me too. I didn't know what was going to come of that. I just knew that it was the right thing to do. It felt like the most loving thing to do for him because I already had absolutely everything that I wanted in a relationship. I had everything I wanted sexually. I'm full up to here, and I'm watching him struggle and struggle and struggle. And part of that is like you want what you can't have, what you're told you can't have.
Yep.
And so helping to relieve that energy. And I didn't know what the results would be, Nathan.
Yeah.
So this also was a big trust fall with God. But I have to tell you, in the moment when I made that declaration to him, I felt the peace and presence of God so overwhelm me. Like this is what love does. And and I know that in conventional Western America, that sounds like a nightmare. Um, but it wasn't. And so that was one of the ways that I knew that it was the right decision. It was moving us in the right direction. And he never acted on it. He said he had a couple minutes of woohoo, I got a hall pass. Yay. And then he went, no, I don't want that. I don't.
Yeah.
That's not who I actually am.
It's not who he is. It's never been who he's been. So there was something I was going to respond to.
Well, I don't remember the original question. Maybe if I say a couple of things, it'll trigger it because I'd love to get your thoughts. While you're thinking on that, Denise, Joe, you said a few things that caught my attention, so I was jotting down some notes here. I'm a bit, maybe to a fault, and again, we could probably unpack the psychology behind all of this, but I'm a bit obsessed with not just the idea of I guess ultimately the idea of personal responsibility as it relates to any element of my life. I'm very much the last person who's going to try to blame someone else. At least at the outset, I'm looking, wait, what did I do wrong? Whether that's my health, whether that's in my business or that's in my relationships. And so I have, I guess, that bias in a sense. But when we talked earlier about the idea of personal responsibility, and maybe just to push back, and I'd love to get your honest take on this, Joe. When you said earlier that you gave as much as you could in the context of the marriage that you were in. By the way, I was married previously as well, so I can relate to the story. But I know in hindsight, for me, if I look back at that relationship, where I can certainly point out what I would maybe say are objectively red flags, if you will, in the context of that relationship, certainly things that didn't reflect what I ultimately wanted in my life. I also know that I didn't actually truly give what I could, in hindsight anyway, in that relationship. And I know that had I behaved more maturely or in various different ways that I could, bullet point out now, that there might have been a lot more hope for that relationship to continue. Our culture is very obsessed with the idea of being, quote, happy. And, if I'm not happy, then I'm going to go on to the next thing. Again, whatever the context, I don't like this. This doesn't make me feel good. I'm going to go on to the next thing. So is there a balance in here somewhere between, again, that notion of happiness, maybe happiness versus is gratefulness, maybe a little bit better take than happiness, but is there a balance between that kind of drive for happiness in our life in the bigger picture? And again, taking personal responsibility, realizing that maybe if we do take 2 or 3 more steps in this particular direction, there's actually opportunity for improvement. And as a result, in the context of a relationship, maybe I can maintain this relationship. You talked about your ex saying, let's go to marriage counseling. What if you had gone to marriage counseling? What could have played out in that scenario? I know these are all what if questions, but I'm just curious to get your take on maybe what the balance is in that regard, because again, with our culture so obsessed with just how I feel in the moment, I'm going to just act on how I feel in the moment. I feel like there's something to be said for a bit of discipline, a bit of personal ownership, and maybe even, going back to the idea of, you talked about staying in relationships or not. I'm not religious, certainly, but so this is not a moral thing for me, but something to be said for the sacredness of a committed relationship and committing to working on that relationship, assuming, of course, both people are are of a similar mindset and working on that. I know that was all a lot, but I just love to kind of get your take in that regard.
Okay. So,
That was a bad
well,
interview. I threw you like 50 questions at you at once.
no, it's perfect. It's perfect, Nathan. Let me ask you a question.
Please.
Today, in your experience with personal responsibility, are you doing your best?
Hmm. That's a great question. I'm a literal guy. So when I hear best, I think, well, I could do this better. I could do this a little bit better. So I don't honestly feel like I could say I'm doing my best. I feel like there's always room for improvement.
Okay. I hold that in the context of what you said about, in hindsight, perhaps I could have done things differently.
Hmm.
I'd like you to consider the paradigm of you're always only ever doing your best. In any given moment, with the minutia of the choices that you're making, you're only ever making choices that you think are going to work out best for you.
Hmm.
Now, you can play the mental game of, well, I could maybe do something different here, or I could have done something different here, but that's all really ego continuing to cause a suffering experience.
Hmm.
From the paradigm of I'm only ever doing my best. In my former relationship, I was only ever doing my best with what I knew at that time, with the level of consciousness that I was engaged in at that time. I was doing my best. And whether that was being a husband or a parent or a photographer, I was only ever doing my best. The ego is always wanting to project we are not good enough. If the core belief is we're not good enough, then of course there has to be space for us to improve and try to and maybe think, often believe we could be doing things differently. And if we just followed some prescription we were told or we read, that my life would be happier. Happiness is, I'm finding, found in a contentment in the unfolding experience of my life.
Hmm.
That I'm not controlling. I'm not controlling the experience of my life as challenges show up, as simple joys, as a bird comes up into my yard to feed and sings its song. I'm not controlling any of that. I am contently watching it and witnessing things as they're unfolding, and I'm only ever doing my best. And best is maybe not the word. Maybe that's the triggering word, as you said. I'm only ever doing what I can do, my capacity, the fullness of what I can do in any moment. And again, back to the paradigm that marriage, even as you said, maybe sacredly should be together. Who said that? And is that really true? Can we question and if it is our belief that marriage is going to be forever, and if it's not, and we have fantasies or ideas about other people, and maybe my life would be better here, or maybe I would be more sexually satisfied here, and we don't tell anybody about those, and we're just holding them and we're keeping those personal fantasies going. I suspect many of us are doing this, wanting something in our life to look different. Well, if my wife just dressed differently, or if she cut her hair differently, or she just pleased me this way sexually, or it allowed me to invite other partners into our experience. We can have all these ideas of what could be better. But if we can simply accept that this is the experience that I'm having, if in this relationship, this is what's showing up, Denise is capable of bringing all of this of herself to me, even though I would maybe like her to dress differently or do this other thing. If I can remove this idea that she needs to be in some way different, and I can just simply experience the joy and the contentment of how she shows up for today. I have no idea what tomorrow is going to bring. I don't know if that would bring another relationship. I don't know. But today I'm experiencing this. I'm making the best choices that I can in this relationship. And it's a continual learning experience.
And you talked about contentment there. I mentioned the idea of gratefulness versus happiness earlier. Do you think there's something to be said for that there? That if in order to truly live in the present and to enjoy the present and to quote, be happy in the present, if I'm grateful for the experience in front of me, especially considering the context of everything, it seems like and in fact, almost in a way, it seems to kind of describe the experience you had when Denise said, "Hey, you know what? Yeah, go do your thing." And it caused you to pause and then realize what you had in front of you, and that the innate gratefulness to that experience actually drew you back to her. I'm wondering if there's something to be said for gratefulness, the emphasis on gratefulness, maybe versus just a simple idea of happiness. Again, words are funny because different people use them differently, and so I think, and I don't mean to get too stuck on that, but I think we also need. It's important to define words because when I say I just want to be happy, that can mean different things to different people, and if some people are treating happiness or referring when they've referred to happiness, they're talking about this what is in all reality just a temporary feeling of euphoria that lasts 30 minutes or an hour or 2 days or whatever that might be, and that's the frame of reference for whether or not I decide to stay in this relationship. Man, we're going to have chaos to say the very least, so I'm trying to figure out what, and I know it's not going to look the same for everybody. I'm not trying to create anything black and white here, but I'm pushing back a little bit because I feel like in a culture where, again, we're so feelings driven, especially the current generation, even more so, it seems. Is there something to be said for that commitment and maybe the commitment driven by gratefulness? I know that it has to assume things such as both partners are collectively making or taking individual responsibility. Not collectively, they're taking individual responsibility in that relationship, or yeah, it's not going to go anywhere. But if they're both committed to that, they may temporarily feel unhappy for a day or two or a month or whatever it is, but they're grateful for what they do have, and they're committed to this idea of, I used the word sacred earlier. I don't mean that, literally. I don't, there's not any real weight to that for me. I'm just thinking about the significance of something like that versus, again, what culturally right now, within our culture right now, there seems to be just this kind of almost wishy-washiness. I feel like this today, so I'm going to do this. I don't feel like this today, so I'm not going to do that. I don't feel like going to the gym today, and so I'm going to let myself go. I don't feel like trying with my business today. And we all know how those things play out when we just kind of don't do it because we don't feel like it, because it doesn't make us happy in the moment. Again, I'm coming back to that question of where is the balance between this kind of, I'm going to use the word here just for the sake of conversation, obsession over happiness versus maybe shifting it more toward a sense of gratefulness with also a combination of gratefulness and personal responsibility.
Yeah. Well, happiness is an emotion and love is not. So if we're talking about the foundation being love, then that is a very different experience than the foundation of being happy. And if you think your partner is here to make you happy, you are going to be very disillusioned.
Yeah.
That is, it was never intended to be like that. And as far as like, how do you know when to fight and when to let go, when to hold them, when to fold them? So I was in a relationship for 36 years,
Mm.
and I could tell what it took to stay was taking so much more energy from me to stay. And it wasn't a horrible relationship, wasn't a fighting. It wasn't like, a lot of people looking in from the outside wouldn't have known that it was as challenging as it was. It was really two people who met in high school with high school maturity and the wounds of childhood glaring, and those frequencies finding each other. And my first husband, his name is Tim, he was such a great teacher for me. And so I believe that the divine intention for these intimate relationships is for our growth and our healing.
Yeah.
It's for us to evolve and to heal. And when you are butting up against the ceiling of the classroom, then you've learned everything that you can with this teacher. And now it's time to move on. And moving on doesn't even mean moving with somebody else. It can just be this experience, this classroom no longer serves me.
Mm.
And so I need another teacher, or I need another experience in order to continue to evolve. So it's not, and we don't know when that can happen, if it will happen in a relationship. So I think like the original commitment and vows that we work with in America, I think they're harmful. Uh, what I think it would be way more helpful would be, I am committing to stay in this relationship as long as this relationship continues to create growth in one another,
Hmm.
to create healing in one another. Because if it starts harming your partner, it really is time to go. But if your partner, like in our relationship, if I hadn't been had the understanding that I had, then his words and actions would have harmed me. Now that from a place of love would have been really good to let go.
Hmm.
But because I was where I was and I understood that I needed these triggers and I was addressing the things in myself that required my healing and my attention, I could stay with it in a way that didn't harm me. And then it also didn't harm him.
Yeah.
So you can hear the distinction in that between that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So, and this is like, I think, relationships are like making a plan to build a house. Like you've got to lay your foundation and then you do all your structures and you run into stuff. And this shouldn't go there. Now we need to move it over there. And oh shoot, the walls aren't true. And now we got to make adjustments to blah, 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 blah. But nobody's given up on the project. Nobody hates the project. It's just obvious that things need to make adjustments in order for this to eventually be the house that we dreamed of. And people can walk off the job.
Mm. Yeah, what a great analogy. Wow. I
Yeah.
know I mentioned this, I think I mentioned this to you all the other day when we were chatting. And you reminded me of this again, Denise, as you're talking, the significance of ultimately keeping an open mind to the experience that I'm having on the other side of someone, certainly in the context of a romantic relationship, but just in general, realizing, or I guess, what's the word? Well, for lack of a better word, just owning the potential reality that every experience that I have, particularly on the other side of somebody, is an opportunity for me to learn. And maybe in one form or another, a mirror and or a spotlight back on an issue or issues that I need to address. I was reminded of this again this morning when I was in a rush, or earlier today when I was in a rush to get to the gym and then try to get back after I'd gotten some work done to get back in time for our conversation. And so naturally I'm in a rush. And of course I end up right behind a really slow car. And I think I audibly laughed out loud. It seemed like such a little thing, but I was like, oh, here we are again in this situation. And I had to laugh because it was like immediately, and I'm so thankful for this. This has only happened within the last, I don't know, maybe month to 2 months or so, where my kind of almost immediate response is, oh, what's the lesson that I need to be reminded of here? My impatience, it's nobody's fault that I'm in a rush. So the fact that this car may be going a little bit slower than the speed limit in the moment, is not their fault, and certainly no reason for me to get upset. And fortunately, I was at least able to laugh in the moment and realize the significance again of that lesson, and then the reminder, and looking for the opportunity to learn through something that maybe immediately frustrated me, but ultimately was an opportunity to continue to work on myself. So I love that reminder. Guys, I mean, we're already way over an hour into this conversation, and I know we could probably go like another 2 hours, but I want to respect your time and our audience's time. And maybe, crossing my fingers, if you guys are willing at some point to come back and do a second episode, I'd love to further explore some of these topics. I feel like you've been a wonderful combination of guests and my therapist and my parents and my friends today. So thank you so much for that. And as we close too, will you share a little bit with our audience and myself, because I don't know a ton about it, about your nonprofit that you're working in?
Sure. Of course. So it's called New Paradigm of Love. And we have a retreat center where people can come and work with us individually, either privately or with a group of their friends or families members that they want to bring along on this journey. And really, we're helping people shift from the false identity, false beliefs, those things that govern our lives,
Mm.
to their true identity and those things that will create limitlessness in their life, in their experience. And of course, this new paradigm of love that we've been speaking about today, which is a state that allows us to do no harm. And I think that most of us would agree we'd really like to do no harm.
Yeah.
And so many people live with the regret of having harmed. another. And so it really helps set people's lives up to finally become aware of how the ego harms ourselves and others.
Mm.
And really that there really are two of us here. There is the ego that is often running the show until around midlife when people start getting sick of it. And then there is our true identity, our true essence, which is this spark of the divine that is the state of love. So and then we also do private coaching, and we work off of donations so that people can come out here. Money is not a stopping point for them. We don't want money to prevent somebody that's actually ready to do the work to come out and do work with us. Yeah.
And Joe, I remember looking at the website. Do I remember you have some title like chief hugger or something to that effect?
Yes. Because in my paradigm, people are not touched enough.
Agreed.
And I love hugging. I've always loved hugging. I'm super comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
And I get to watch people who, maybe have had some resistance or have been inappropriately touched. There are many people who are inappropriately touched and don't trust yet. And
Yeah.
that's the holes in the bucket. And so with a gentle, masculine, safe, fatherly hug, boy, that's ointment for healing the holes in the bucket.
Oh, yeah. I mean, speaking of being able to go on for hours more, I don't think in our culture, whether it's around romantic relationships or not, that there's enough discussion around healthy touch and the benefits of it. The most that we might see is these little, bullet point, quick article about here are the physiological benefits of physical contact. But I don't think there's enough conversation around the true deep benefit of it. And maybe more active conversation around how we can begin to incorporate that into our lives more actively, whether in a romantic relationship or not. So maybe this is one of the topics that we can come back to at another time. I'd really like to explore that a little bit. I can't thank you guys enough. This has been such a treat for me selfishly, and I hope a massive value add to our audience as well. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I will link for anybody who's curious, I'll link to your website in the show notes. By the way, for anybody listening in, Joe and Denise didn't ask me to promo their organization, but just if you want some context, especially as to the work that they're doing and some of the things that we were talking about, you can go take a look at their website, and I'll link to that in the show notes. Thanks once again, Joe and Denise. I truly appreciate it.
Welcome, Nathan. We're happy to support your work, honey.
Yeah.